A silver disk spins in the sky. 70,000 witnesses scream, weep, fall to their knees in the mud. But the true mystery isn't in the sun. It's in 3 children who chose prison rather than betray a secret from heaven. 1917. The world burns in the most devastating war humanity has ever known. In the trenches of Verdun and the Somme, millions of young men die amid mustard gas and machine guns. Empires crumble, faith wavers. In Portugal, the situation is no better. The Republic, born 7 years earlier, has declared war on the church. Convents shuttered, priests deported, crosses torn from schools. In Lisbon, Masonic politicians toast to the death of God. They believe they have won. But 200 kilometers to the north, in the Cova da Iria, there exists a place that progress has forgotten. Aljustrel is barely a handful of whitewashed stone houses, where women spin while they pray, where men work the land with their grandfathers' hands, where children learn the Our Father before they learn their letters. Here, in this land of oak trees and flocks, heaven has chosen to plant its flag. Lucia dos Santos was born to be a shepherd. At 10 years old, she already carried on her thin shoulders the responsibility of the family flock, those few sheep that represented a good part of the Santos family's livelihood. Her mother, Maria Rosa, was a woman forged in the iron of Portuguese faith. She prayed the rosary every night, knew the lives of the saints as one knows their neighbors, and tolerated neither lies nor laziness. From her, Lucia inherited the backbone she would need for the years to come. Her father, Antonio, was softer, more inclined to the tavern than the church, but he loved his children with that quiet tenderness of country men. Lucia was the youngest of 7 siblings, and perhaps that's why she developed that mix of independence and leadership that set her apart among the children of Aljustrel. Francisco Marto was still water where Lucia was a torrent. At 9 years old, the son of Manuel Marto and Olimpia de Jesus preferred solitude to boisterous games. While other children ran and shouted, he would sit beneath a holm oak playing melodies on his reed flute, melodies no one had taught him, and that seemed to spring from somewhere very deep. He spoke little, observed much. His large, dark eyes seemed to always look beyond the visible. His sister Jacinta, 2 years younger, was his perfect opposite. Everything in her was excess, intensity, passion. She laughed with her whole body, cried with her whole heart. When she saw a beggar, she wanted to give him everything she had. When she heard talk of Jesus' suffering, tears streamed down her cheeks as if she herself felt the nails. Together, these 3 cousins formed a small world apart, a trio that each morning took the flocks to pasture and each night returned with secrets only they shared. But the year before the apparitions of the Virgin, something extraordinary began to prepare their souls for what was to come. In the spring of 1916, while tending the sheep in a place called Loca do Cabeço, a strange wind shook the trees. The children looked up and saw a figure of light approaching. A young man of about 14 or 15 years, whiter than snow, transparent as crystal pierced by sunlight. He introduced himself as the Angel of Peace. He knelt, bowed his forehead until it touched the ground, and taught them a prayer they would repeat thousands of times throughout their lives. He returned in summer, by the well in the Marto family's garden, to urge them to pray and make sacrifices. And he came back in autumn, again at Loca do Cabeço, carrying a chalice and a host from which drops of blood fell. He gave them communion in a miraculous way, the host to Lucia, the chalice to Francisco and Jacinta. The children remained prostrate for hours, all sense of time lost. immersed in a peace that was not of this world. Francisco was the one who most deeply felt the weight of those encounters. After each apparition of the angel, he remained in a state of absorption that worried his parents. He had no hunger, no thirst, barely spoke. When Lucia asked him what he felt, he answered with words that seemed to come from very far away. "I felt that God was within us, but I don't know how to explain it." Jacinta, for her part, experienced a mixture of joy and fear that made her quieter than usual, she who was so talkative. The three had received a grace that set them apart from the other children of the village, though no one knew it yet. They kept absolute silence about the angel's visits. They said nothing to their parents, nor to the parish priest, nor to their siblings. The angel had taught them, without words, that there are mysteries that must be guarded in the deepest part of the heart, like seeds waiting for their time to sprout. And so, in silence and prayer, 3 shepherd children from a forgotten village were prepared to become messengers of heaven. May 13th, 1917. The spring sun warms the Cova da Iria, that rocky hollow where scattered holm oaks grow and where Lucia's family owns some grazing land. The 3 cousins have brought the flock there after Mass, as they do so many Sundays. Around noon, while playing at building a small stone wall, a flash of lightning tears across the clear sky. There are no clouds, no storm, but the flash is unmistakable. Lucia, the most cautious, orders them to gather the sheep and head down toward the road. They run a few meters when a second flash of lightning stops them dead in their tracks. And then, above a small holm oak barely a meter tall, they see her. She is a young lady, dressed entirely in white, so luminous that their eyes hurt to look at her. Her joined hands hold a rosary of gleaming beads. Her face, Lucia would say years later, was of a beauty impossible to describe with human words. Lucia finds the courage to speak. "Where is your grace from?" The answer comes with a voice that is music and clarity. "I am from heaven." She asks them to return to that same place on the 13th of each month, for 6 months. She asks if they are willing to offer themselves to God, to endure sufferings in reparation for sins and for the conversion of sinners. The 3 children, without hesitation, without fully understanding what they are accepting, answer yes. The lady warns them, "You will have much to suffer, but the grace of God will be your strength." Then she rises toward the east and disappears into the vastness of the sky. The return home marks the beginning of their earthly Calvary. Jacinta, with her 7 years and her overflowing heart, is unable to contain the secret. That very night she tells everything to her mother, who listens with a mixture of amazement and skepticism. The news leaps from house to house like a spark through stubble. By nightfall, half the village knows. Maria Rosa, Lucia's mother, reacts with fury. Her youngest daughter, precisely the one she had raised with the most religious zeal, inventing apparitions. Shame consumes her. She interrogates Lucia again and again, threatens her, strikes her, drags her before the parish priest to confess her lie. Father Ferreira, a prudent but bewildered priest, doesn't know what to think. It could be the work of the devil, he suggests, which terrifies Lucia more than her mother's blows. In the Marto household, the atmosphere is different. Manuel Marto, Francisco and Jacinta's father, observes his children with the eyes of a wise peasant. He knows his children better than anyone. He knows that Francisco never lies, that Jacinta is incapable of sustaining a deception. Something has happened, he concludes. What exactly, I don't know, but my children don't lie. His wife, Olympia, shares that quiet certainty. But the division is sown. Those who believe, those who doubt, those who openly mock. June 13th brings the second apparition and new revelations that weigh like stones upon their young shoulders. The lady announces to the three little shepherds that Francisco and Jacinta will be taken to heaven soon. Lucia, however, must remain longer on earth. There is a mission for her, to spread throughout the world devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Jacinta, upon hearing that she will go to heaven without her cousin, breaks into tears with that weeping of hers that seems to come from the very bowels of the earth. She doesn't want to be separated from Lucia, but she accepts, as she will accept everything that comes. Francisco receives the news of his approaching death with a serenity that bewilders those who know him. For him, going to heaven means finally being close to that Jesus hidden in the tabernacle who draws him so strongly. From that day on, his life changes radically. He spends hours before the altar of the small church of Fatima, motionless, his eyes fixed on the tabernacle. When they ask him what he's doing, he responds with crushing simplicity. "I'm consoling our Lord, who is so sad because of the sins of the world." At 9 years old, Francisco has understood something that many adults will never understand: that God can be consoled, that our love matters to him, that our sacrifices somehow mysteriously lighten the weight of human ingratitude. The crowds begin to grow. By July, several thousand people gather at the Cova da Iria. They come from neighboring villages, from distant towns, some out of curiosity, others out of devotion, many out of desperation. The war continues devouring their sons in France, and Portuguese mothers seek any hope. The children, meanwhile, learn to bear the weight of being the center of all eyes. Lucia develops a shell of reserve that protects her from the constant interrogations. Francisco retreats even further into silence and prayer. Jacinta, the most fragile in appearance, demonstrates a strength that surprises everyone. She begins to practice small mortifications that no one has taught her. She gives up her lunch to poorer children, endures thirst under the summer sun, offers every discomfort for the sinners she so fears will go to hell. The adults observe these three children and don't know what to think. They are too normal to be impostors, too extraordinary to be simply children. Something burns in them that has no natural explanation. And that fire, far from consuming them, seems to purify them day after day, preparing them for the terrible trials that summer will bring. The 13th of July, 1917, marks a before and after in the history of Fatima. The Cova da Iria seethes with several thousand pilgrims who have come from every corner of Portugal. Among them are sincere devotees, skeptical onlookers, and also spies from the Republican government taking notes on everything they see. The three little shepherds arrive escorted by a crowd that pushes them, touches them, tears threads from their clothing as relics. Lucia, at 10 years old, has learned to move through the multitude with a determination that astonishes the adults. Francisco walks with his eyes lowered, taking refuge in that inner silence that is his fortress. Jacinta, the little one, trembles with emotion and something more, a premonition that this day will bring terrible revelations. When the lady appears above the holm oak, wrapped in her light brighter than the midday sun, the children fall to their knees. And then begins the vision that will mark their souls forever. The Virgin opens her hands, and from them springs a beam of light that seems to pierce the earth itself. The three children see hell. It is not an image, it is not a symbol. It is a reality that opens before their eyes like a wound in the cosmos. A sea of fire where demons and human souls float, transparent like black embers, amid screams of pain and desperation, that no human ear should ever hear. The vision lasts barely an instant, but that instant is branded into the children's memory with white-hot iron. Jacinta screams. Francisco turns so pale he looks dead. Lucia feels her heart is about to stop. When they raise their eyes toward the lady, they see tears in her eyes. "You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go," she tells them. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. The second part of the secret flows from the Virgin's lips as prophecy and warning. The war devastating Europe will end soon, but if men do not stop offending God, another worse one will begin during the pontificate of Pius XI. Russia will spread its errors throughout the world, promoting wars and persecutions of the Church. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. But in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, which will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. The children do not understand everything they hear. They do not know what Russia is. They do not know any pope. But they engrave each word in their memory with a fidelity that defies all natural explanation. The third part of the secret remains sealed in Lucia's heart, with express orders not to reveal it yet. It is a weight she will carry for decades, a mystery that will cause rivers of ink and endless speculation to flow. When the vision ends and the lady disappears toward the east, the three children are transformed. They are no longer the same ones who climbed to the Cova that morning. They have seen the eternal destiny of souls. They have received prophecies about the future of the world. They carry upon their young shoulders secrets that would make the wisest theologians tremble. From that day on, Jacinta cannot think of anything but sinners. The vision of hell pursues her day and night. Those souls falling into the fire like snowflakes into a bonfire, those screams that no human throat should emit, that endless desperation without hope. She begins to multiply her sacrifices with an intensity that alarms those who know her. When she is thirsty under the scorching Portuguese summer sun, she offers that thirst for sinners and does not drink. When she is hungry, she gives her snack to the poor children she meets along the way. When the stones on the ground hurt her bare feet, she walks more slowly to prolong the discomfort and offer it for those who do not know God. Jacinta is 7 years old, barely 7, and she has already understood the mystery of vicarious redemption, that suffering accepted out of love can save souls, that our small sacrifices united to the cross of Christ have a power that escapes all human measure. Francisco, for his part, plunges even more deeply into contemplation. The vision of hell has revealed to him, by contrast, the infinite mercy of God who offers salvation to all. And that mercy, rejected, that love spurned, produces in him a pain that he can only relieve by spending hours before the tabernacle. "I am consoling Jesus," he repeats when asked what he does for so long in the church. He is so sad because they offend him so much. But August brings a trial that will surpass everything before. The administrator of the Council of Vilanova de Ourem, Artur de Oliveira Santos, has decided that the farce of Fatima must end. This man, a declared Mason and militant anti-clerical, sees in the apparitions a threat to the Republican project of tearing faith from the heart of Portugal. On the 13th of August, the day of the promised fourth apparition, he appears in Aljustrel with his automobile and deceives the children's parents by telling them he will take them to the Cova da Iria. Instead, he drives them to Vilanova de Ourem and locks them in the public jail, alongside thieves and drunkards. For 2 days and 2 nights, the 3 little shepherds remain in a foul-smelling cell, surrounded by criminals who at first mock them and end up moved by their courage. The administrator interrogates them separately, using every intimidation technique he knows. He tells them their cousins have already been executed for not revealing the secret. He threatens to fry them alive in boiling oil if they do not confess that everything has been a lie. He offers them gold and freedom in exchange for the truth. Francisco, at 9 years old, looks the administrator in the eyes and responds with a firm voice that he would rather die than betray the lady from heaven. Jacinta, trembling with fear but not yielding an inch, declares that not all the gold in the world would make her reveal what she cannot reveal. Lucia, the eldest, the natural leader of the group, holds her ground before an adult man who represents all the power of the state. After 48 hours of psychological terror, the administrator understands that he has been defeated by 3 illiterate children. He releases them without charges, humiliated before the entire district. News of their courage spreads like wildfire. The little shepherds have defeated the government with the only weapon of their unshakable faith. October 13th, 1917. Since the early hours of dawn, a persistent cold rain soaks the Cova da Iria. The dirt roads have become rivers of mud where carts get stuck and pilgrims slip. But no one stops. From every corner of Portugal, from Spain, from even more distant places, a human tide converges on Cova da Iria. 70,000 souls by the most conservative estimates, perhaps 100,000 according to others. They come on foot, on mules, in ox-drawn carts, some in the scarce automobiles of the era. There are illiterate peasants who have walked for days on end. There are bourgeois from Lisbon with their black umbrellas. There are priests risking their freedom in a country that persecutes the church. There are journalists sent by anti-clerical newspapers to document the failure of religious fanaticism. Among them stands out Avelino de Almeida, editor-in-chief of the influential O Século, Portugal's most anti-clerical newspaper, who has come with the express mission of definitively discrediting this medieval superstition. Everyone expects something. Many expect a miracle. Others expect to be able to laugh at the gullible. No one imagines what is about to happen. The 3 little shepherds arrive at the cova, escorted by a crowd that presses against them, pushes them, wants to touch them as if they were living relics. Lucia walks with that determination she has forged through months of interrogations and pressures. Francisco advances with half-closed eyes, already almost completely submerged in that inner world where he has dwelt since the angel's apparitions. Jacinta, soaked to the bone, trembles not from cold but from anticipation. She knows this is the promised day, the day of the great miracle that the lady announced, so that all may believe. When they reach the holm oak over which the Virgin appears, they can barely move amid the press of bodies. A priest clears a path for them by pushing. The clock marks close to noon, though the leaden sky makes it impossible to tell the exact hour. The rain keeps falling relentlessly. Suddenly, Lucia cries out with a voice that cuts through the murmur of the crowd, "Close your umbrellas." The people obey without knowing why. And then the lady appears, more luminous than ever, so bright that the 3 children can barely hold her gaze. She is Our Lady of the Rosary, and she has come to fulfill her promise. What happens next defies all natural explanation. The rain stops abruptly. The clouds part like curtains of a celestial theater, and the sun appears, but not like the sun of every day. It is a pale silver disk that can be looked at directly without hurting the eyes. It begins to spin on itself like a wheel of fire, casting beams of light of every color of the spectrum across the landscape, across the people, across the trees. Red, yellow, green, blue, violet. The colors follow one another in waves that tint the faces of those present, that transform the mud into an iridescent mosaic, that paint the clouds with impossible hues. 10 minutes this spectacle lasts, one that no human eye has ever witnessed. But the worst is yet to come. The sun seems to break loose from its place in the firmament. It begins to fall toward the earth in a zigzag, spinning faster and faster, approaching the crowd with a heat that scorches the faces turned upward. Panic erupts like a wave. Thousands of people scream, fall to their knees, confess to one another at the top of their lungs, pray the rosary through sobs, beg forgiveness for their sins, convinced that the end of the world has come. Mothers embrace their children, grown men weep like children, declared atheists invoke the name of God. And then, when it seems the sun is about to crash into the earth, it stops. It returns to its place in the sky with the same zigzagging trajectory. The clouds close. Everything ends. The second miracle goes almost unnoticed amid the commotion, but it is equally inexplicable. The clothing of 70,000 people, soaked by hours of torrential rain, is completely dry. The mud that covered shoes and skirts has evaporated. It is as if the rain had never fallen, as if the dancing sun had absorbed all the moisture in those 10 minutes of wonder. Avelino de Almeida, the anti-clerical journalist, stands motionless for long minutes, unable to process what his eyes have seen. When he finally takes up his pen, he writes a chronicle that will travel around the world and cost him the scorn of his free-thinking colleagues. He saw everything, he cannot explain it, but his professional honesty prevents him from denying it. Meanwhile, the three little shepherds have witnessed visions that only they can see. The Lady has shown herself to them successively as Our Lady of Sorrows with Christ carrying the cross, as Our Lady of Mount Carmel with the child Jesus in her arms, and finally alongside Saint Joseph blessing the world. She has repeated her essential message to them with words that resonate like bells in the silence of the soul, that they pray the rosary every day, that they convert, that they no longer offend our Lord God who is already greatly offended. The war will end, she has promised. And indeed, 13 months later, the armistice of November 11th, 1918, will put an end to the slaughter of the Great War. Heaven has spoken, the sun has danced, and 3 children from a forgotten village have been the chosen instruments so that the world may remember that God exists, that He loves us, and that He awaits our response. The Spanish flu arrived in Portugal in the autumn of 1918 like an exterminating angel that made no distinction between rich and poor, between believers and atheists. In Aljustrel, the church bells tolled each day for new dead. Francisco and Jacinta Marto fell ill almost simultaneously, their small bodies consumed by a fever that no home remedy could overcome. But while the world saw in them just 2 more children among the millions of pandemic victims, they knew exactly what was happening. The Lady had announced it to them in June of 1917. Francisco and Jacinta would be taken to heaven soon. The promise was being fulfilled. Francisco received the news of his imminent death with a peace that bewildered those around him. During the months of illness, his only concern was receiving communion, that encounter with the hidden Jesus to whom he had devoted so many hours of silent adoration. The parish priest hesitated to give viaticum to such a young child, but Francisco insisted with a determination unusual for his 10 years. When he finally received Christ in the Eucharist, his face lit up with a smile that those present would remember all their lives. On the 4th of April, 1919, after asking forgiveness from everyone for any fault he might have committed, Francisco Marto surrendered his soul to God. He died as he had lived the last 2 years, in silence, in peace, consoling Jesus until his final breath. Jacinta's Calvary was longer and more painful, as if heaven wished to purify that small diamond until it reached an unbearable brilliance. The flu developed into purulent pleurisy, then into bone tuberculosis. An abscess devoured her side. The doctors in Aljustrel could do nothing, so she was transferred first to the hospital in Vilanova de Urem and then to Lisbon, far from her mother, her father, Lucia, from everything she knew and loved. In those cold and anonymous wards, surrounded by strangers who did not understand who this peasant girl was, Jacinta endured operations without anesthesia. They removed 2 of her ribs. They drained the purulent abscess. Each procedure was an agony that she offered for sinners, for the Holy Father, for the conversion of Russia. The Virgin appeared to her several times in the hospital to console her and reveal new visions. Future wars that would devastate the world, terrible persecutions against the Church, the Pope, dressed in white, falling under bullets. Jacinta kept everything in her heart, as she had learned to do since that first apparition of the angel. On the 20th of February 1920, completely alone in a room at the Dona Estefania Hospital in Lisbon, Jacinta Marto died. She was 9 years old. The nurse who found her declared that her face radiated a supernatural peace, as if in the final moment she had seen something of indescribable beauty. Lucia was left alone with the weight of the secret and the mission. The lady had told her she must remain longer on earth to spread devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and Lucia obeyed with that unwavering fidelity that characterized her. In 1921, she entered as a student at the College of the Dorothean Sisters in Vilar, near Porto, where she could study far from the constant harassment of pilgrims and the curious. Later, she took religious vows, first as a Dorothean, and then, in 1948, as a discalced Carmelite at the convent in Coimbra, where she would remain until her death. In obedience to her superiors and the bishops, she wrote her memoirs in several volumes, progressively revealing the details of the apparitions she had guarded for decades. In 1929, at the convent of Tui in Spain, the Virgin appeared to her again to formally request the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart. The message of Fatima began to spread throughout the entire world. Successive popes studied it, venerated it, partially fulfilled it. Pius XII consecrated the world to the Immaculate Heart in 1942. John Paul II, who attributed to the Virgin of Fatima having saved his life in the assassination attempt of May 13, 1981, performed a more specific consecration in 1984 and revealed the third part of the secret in the year 2000, when he beatified Francisco and Jacinta. On May 13, 2017, exactly 100 years after the first apparition, Pope Francis canonized the 2 little shepherds in a massive ceremony on the esplanade of the sanctuary of Fatima. Francisco and Jacinta Marto became the youngest non-martyr saints in the history of the Church, living testimonies that holiness has no age and that God can work wonders through the smallest ones. Lucia did not live to see the canonization of her cousins. She had died on February 13, 2005, at 97 years old, after almost a century of silent fidelity to the mission that heaven had entrusted to her. Her beatification process is underway, but her legacy is already immortal. Thanks to her, we know the details of the apparitions, the exact words of the Virgin, the complete content of the secret that so troubled the world. 3 shepherd children from a forgotten village in Portugal were chosen to transmit a message that has reached every corner of the earth. They guarded it with their silence when silence was necessary. They sealed it with their suffering when suffering was asked. They authenticated it with their holiness when holiness was recognized. And the Immaculate Heart of Mary, as the lady dressed in white promised, remains a refuge and a path for all who wish to find God. Heaven descended to earth in a Portuguese village to remind us of truths that the modern world wants to forget. That hell exists, and souls fall into it like snowflakes into fire. That our prayers and sacrifices have real power to change eternal destinies. That a mother awaits us with open arms, ready to guide us to her son, if only we accept her hand. Francisco left us the example of contemplative silence, of hours spent before the tabernacle consoling a God who suffers from our indifference. Jacinta bequeathed us the urgency of love that becomes sacrifice, the certainty that no renunciation is too small when offered for the salvation of souls. Lucia showed us unbreakable fidelity, the yes pronounced once and sustained through nearly a century of consecrated life. The daily rosary, the first Saturdays of reparation, the consecration to the Immaculate Heart. These are not outdated devotions but urgent medicines for a world sick with pride and forgetfulness of God. The sun danced over Portugal so that no one could say there were no signs. Heaven shouted its message through 3 children so that no one could claim ignorance. Our Lady of Fatima, Queen of the Most Holy Rosary and Mother of Mercy, pray for us.